Okay, so I'm going to call the Governor's UAV Council, UAS Council to order. We'll start by doing a roll call. Since we have the technology, I'm going to just go off of the participants list and not necessarily have to call everyone by name. That seems to make logical sense to me, if that makes sense to everybody else. I know Dustin did mention that he was not going to be able to attend. Let's see here. Let me just grab this list here. So I've got Wes has joined, so I got him. We have Mike on board.
Yep.
And let's see, I'm trying to get in order here and find the list. We got Butch. Hi, Butch. We got Dan. Dustin was not going to be able to make it. We got Gordy. We got James. We don't have Jason yet. We got Jen. I thought I saw her. Yep, there she is. And Paul. Oh, there we go. Let me get you on my list. And I think this just reordered on me. Oh, and Steve.
Yep.
And got myself. So we're just missing, and JD. We don't have JD yet. So we're missing JD, Jason, and Dustin. All right, we're going to get going here. So thanks everyone for coming back. I know we had a busy meeting last time, just going over the initial bit about the council and how we're going to operate and work going forward in the focus of the discussion. I'm going to jump in real quick here and do a screen share on the team site. Sounded like everyone was able to get to the team site okay. So if you have functionality problems with that, let me know. I didn't get the agenda out to folks. Apologize that. I'm going to be working harder and trying to be timely in these things since there are some requirements around that. But since this is another duty as assigned to my other job, as you can imagine, it gets a little busy. But I did organize a team site. Hopefully you're able to see that. Somebody give me a head nod that that's working. I think that was a nod from Dan.
Yep, got it. Great.
So I got,
it's working fine.
Yeah,
Okay,
everything
good.
worked for me.
So I've got a procurement folder I added here yesterday. Other organization relevant documents. I believe you folks have the capability of renaming some of these. That's not probably the best name for it. What that is there is these are documents that we started collecting when we were a work group that we had from other entities. A lot of it came from other states, some of it from feds, Department of Interior policies, some of the University of Montana stuff. Jen, I haven't added everything that you had sent over on that. If it's relevant, feel free to throw it back up there, but I kind of wanted to let you determine what you wanted to share here and not just have me throw it all out there.
Craig, if you notice on number 2 there, I added that yesterday. I didn't know if I should, but I did. Those are the notes that I sent you, so everybody can look at. Those are some of the things that I gleaned out of the legislative audit document, and just some miscellaneous things. So it's a PDF file. So if anybody wants to read that, they can.
Yep, no, that's perfect. This is a site for the entire team. So if you have something you feel is relevant, please, add it here. And then when we have our meeting, you can either then message folks in the messaging area and say, hey, I added some documents you might be interested in, or something along those lines. Or we'll talk about it at the weekly call saying, hey, I added something I think folks want to take a look at, just like that. So that's perfect. And this is trying to get a little bit of organization for us on this area so that if folks have other things that they find from another state that's really well done and like, hey, this would help us streamline this, let's take a look at this, then absolutely, that's what this is for, to add that.
Okay, good.
We'll probably add more folders as we go along here. I added the procurement one just before the meeting. I was able to find that guide that I somehow I didn't download it last time or something. I lost it. So from the State Procurement Bureau, added those guidelines there, and then we'll have one for the agendas, and I'll probably be adding one for the minutes because I have to start reporting on minutes on these meetings as well. So we'll have one for that too if anyone needs them. And actually, I may add one for the recordings, and if anybody wants to go back and listen to it again, that those will be there too. So those will be coming. A couple of these here I don't have a place for yet as far as the folder goes. Council objectives, that's pretty high level. And looks like Steve added a template from the university, and James added something too. So as we develop those things, we'll end up having probably a draft, a folder for some of our work, adding and doing that to try to help people be able to find stuff in a pretty quick, easy fashion. Any questions on the team site there?
Well, actually what happened was, if you look, there's that standards template, and I think I made some changes and I tried to save it or something. I might have screwed up. So I didn't know if it saved. So you can see one that's above it and has an SW in it. That's the same one. No, it was back. Well, let's see, where was it? Yeah, that one right there.
Oh, I see.
Highlighted. There's one, there's a draft above it that says SW, and I just made some comments in it and I saved it as a different name. So I don't know why. I don't know.
So the most current one is the one we want?
Well, that's the one I just put some stuff in. The other one might be just the same as it was, but you can see the additions I made, because Jen made some additions to it at one time, but I just made some. So
Steve, when you get a chance, why don't you just go back in there and delete the old one, so we don't get
okay,
and that'll be fine.
Okay.
And that'll be a good test. Make sure you have that functionality. So I'm going to switch over to the screen share to, I guess I have to stop and reshare the other document. I'm going to jump over to our agenda. Let's see here. I thought I had it up here. Hold on one second. All right, try this again here. There we go. So today what I thought we'd start doing is talk a little bit more about the procurement piece. If folks recall, that is one of the three things that were deliverables that we're having to develop. And then I'd like us to have a discussion on a bit how to proceed with the other areas. Actually, probably more relevant to share would be the council objectives document. And so there we go. So we'll talk about the procurement process here a little bit and talk about how to do a group breakout so that we can make progress on that, as well as starting to develop progress on the plan and pulling the relevant materials together, trying to keep in line with the scope of where we're trying to head here, and to be able to start making real progress on this in the next several weeks. So has anyone gathered any information or talked to anyone about procurement of UAS devices in your agency? I had a conversation with our aviation person, but I thought I'd check first to see if anybody else has any insight on how their organization procures stuff.
I can mention from the university perspective. You had, I think last week, in one of the documents we were showing, the procurement process for the state was, how we divide up equipment versus supplies, something under 5,000, from 5,000 to 25,000, and 25,000 above. And that's the process we used. Right now, the university doesn't distinguish UAS under anything that's necessarily aviation or IT related. So we just go through whatever bid processes we need to do based on cost, or or we don't do a bid process if it's under 5,000, and sometimes we've done sole source. So our procurement process has been just following the state guidelines so far.
Okay, thanks, Jen. I was kind of wondering about that. And the discussion I had with our folks was along the lines of, is there a difference when you're buying a full plane or in this case, you know, a drone, for example, or parts? Because I know you guys are tending to build your own, and I was curious if that changes how you purchase things under those guidelines.
It doesn't. It actually still goes back to just how much does it cost per piece, essentially. So when we've done anything that's over $5,000, we've either done sole source or we just bid out for the equipment. And then UAS, it falls in the same place again as an aircraft. Really, to some extent, the differences come down to insurance. But when we're purchasing even high-end equipment that's over $100,000, it's the same. We still follow the same process. We don't have to do anything different. Getting bids or going through some sole source.
When you say it comes down to insurance, what is that? What do you mean? What's the relevance there?
Could you repeat that? Sorry.
What was that?
Mike. Oh, this is
Okay,
Mike. I was going to just say we're in a similar situation, and I'm still trying to learn what all is going on at MDT because it's multiple divisions, but obviously following procurement law. But I do know that from an ITPR perspective, and that's a foreign topic to the non-state government folks, they're not, I guess, we're determined it's not subject to the ITPR rules, which is state IT's review and approval process, or at least we're not submitting ITPRs. That's maybe something we should talk about, internal government folks, and how that's going to work, Craig, with D of A.
Yeah, that is on my list as one of the big questions that I know was unresolved, that I think they're looking to the council to give guidance on.
Okay.
I can chime in from DEQ standpoint. We've made 3 purchases of just civil commercial drones since the beginning of the year. Initially, we had some conflict with IT in purchasing and having IT making decisions on equipment rather than the actual pilots and requesters making decisions for example, like the types of SD cards and the types of batteries and how many batteries. So after some initial struggling, we've kind of come to an agreement where it's a joint process where IT gets the request, I review it and approve it, and then it goes forward.
Okay. Jen, I didn't catch the part on the insurance where that weighs in on your process. What can you elaborate on that a little bit?
And that's after the fact. So that's when it starts to really, I guess I would, to simplify this, and maybe I'm oversimplifying a bit, is at first the university is really just looking at the cost, the value, and not what the equipment actually is, although it is different if we purchase actual computers. But UAS are just falling under a cost structure when we first procure them. And then once we have them in place, it depends. So if it's an airplane, a UAS, a car, under our insurance, how we are being billed for insurance, it depends on what that device actually is. So it's after the process.
Oh, that's an interesting, just capturing that down. That's an interesting thought. So one of the things that we, talking with my bureau chief of our aircraft area bureau and such for DNRC, because we have about a half a dozen Hueys that we fly to fight fires on, and several Cessnas for detection and such. And I know transportation has several aircraft. We kind of were talking about UAVs and where does this come down to? And as Mike alluded, the ITPR is an IT information technology procurement request. And currently, the State Information Technology Services Division requires just about any IT purchase to be reviewed and approved by them. And so one of the questions that has come along is a UAV an IT piece of gear, or is it an aircraft piece of gear? And does it have to be submitted under the ITPR process or not? And my personal inclination is I don't want to see the business operations of state agencies and such get encumbered by more red tape than is necessary, and encumbered processes that maybe not providing real benefit. And one of his name is John Monzi, and one of the things he proposed was, maybe what we're actually looking at is kind of a three-tiered categorization of these things. The UAS itself is the airframe. He categorized that. That's the airframe and the power plant. That's the aircraft, and that's that really comes under FAA guidelines. And for them, they follow the same state procurement like anything else. And of course, for most of their gear, it's going to be above 5,000, 25,000. And so if it was purchasing a new aircraft, they were spec'ing on a new helicopter, for example, they would do an RFP on that. And those that provide those types of aircraft could bid on what it would cost the state to procure that. And they would just delineate the type of gear they needed to have. So far as a UAV, it may be that an agency would determine we need something that can fly at 7,000 feet and take infrared pictures at night, and be in the air for 7 hours at a time, and that probably limits the field of who can provide that, but then it gives the metrics, and then anyone that builds those type of craft could then respond to that RFP. So that's how we do that for our aircraft. And for the drone piece itself, maybe that shouldn't follow any other process than what we're already looking at for that. And then the next tier that he saw was the devices that hang off of the UAV, in which case, that's a sensor, right? Some type of digital sensor, remote sensing piece of equipment, as a camera, or for example, or maybe an infrared or hyperspectral sensor. Do we need to do IT reviews for digital cameras or these other type of sensors? And that one probably gets a little more into the gray area that we could discuss on. And then the last tier that he proposed is really the data, which is where I thought, okay, yeah, that's really hitting on that piece, the data gathering, transfer, and storage of the data. And so one of the thoughts that came out of the discussion that I would propose to the group here is that maybe instead of having the whole thing run through an IT procurement request, really what an agency or organization should do is present their IT or data security plan for handling the data of these devices. And if the security plan is reviewed and approved by central IT, then it really doesn't matter which device you're purchasing, as long as it meets those security guidelines. And so if in your security guidelines are, we're not buying anything from China, then that's guiding your purchasing process. Do they really need to review that, the internal agency or other central organization as is determined, perhaps reviews that as part of the overall purchase analysis or something. But where does that go? And does it go through general state procurement? Does it go through IT? Does it have to run through both? Or is it within the agency like an aircraft would be today? And so that was the thought he came up with, and I thought there was some good points in that. Any thoughts on that anyone wants to add to?
I'd add one thing, Cray, and it's, to me, I don't want to ball anything up with red tape, and that's why I've kind of stayed out of things with our business units who want to use drones, and we're using them extensively. But the data and what we're doing with it and how we're securing it where it needs to be secured and sharing it where it needs to be shared is very important, and not just within this organization, but there might be other people outside of MDT that have about a need to use some of the data we've collected. And I think this council could help steer a method to ensure we're not collecting redundant data and that we're making it available to the public to private sector to other government entities so that we're making the best use of the money we're investing in it. And instead of having our own little pockets of data, and that concept in my mind applies to data in general, but this is a great example of kind of a new data set and something we should be looking at from the big picture of how we're sharing it.
And then possibly that data plan could be pre-approved. I'm thinking if done right, that if the person is if the agency's gonna go out and do some drone work, if they say we're using the pre-approved data plan, maybe the approval's done ahead of time.
Yeah, no, I agree with both. I think that would streamline it quite a bit, but also meet the objectives of, IT. Because IT's concern basically is security, right? Is it secure, and are we doing it in a secure manner? If we had a data plan by which we're following, do they need to review every little piece that comes through that pipeline? I would rather be able to say, this is the data plan, the data plan's approved, therefore all the pieces will follow the pipeline, and we're good. And Mike, as far as the sharing, I totally agree. And I was just thinking of, I didn't know if I could get my fingers on the link. So for others, the state has a LiDAR elevation working group that is following a similar process as I think what our drone information would be. They're just a little bit further down the road, and they are working on a enterprise collaboration of that data that all gets entered into a single portal and is mapped out. So if you can imagine, it's a map of the state of Montana, and it highlights spatially all the locations that someone has collected LiDAR data for, and would identify the date and density of that LiDAR information and the elevation, so that anybody could request it. So if we had a private business that was like, oh, I'm have a project in that area, it'd be really helpful to have the LiDAR data from that. You could be able to delineate in the application the area that you wanted, and be able to do the download of the LiDAR data. And it also identifies areas that are planned to be collected in the future, that we're working on through grant processes or other agency plans, so that people aren't doing redundant work on the same area, but we're actually completing the mosaic for an area. And so that, to me, that concept would be a very attractive one for this information as well, that if an agency collected data and wanted to make that available because it was public in nature for the type of data, they could enter that in the portal that anybody could then leverage and utilize and not have to recollect.
I just want to throw in that recently we've had discussions on a section in the 2018 Reauthorization Act that deals with, and the question we have is whether we need to follow this, but I'm going to put the section, just the quoted parts, in the chat real quick. And according to this, we would need to put that in there. As entities that are using UAS under 107, that we would have to have a policy that states how we're collecting the data, using the data, retaining the data, disseminating the data, and deleting any of the data. So I've actually pulled in the UM lawyer to just see how much of this we need to do, but also this brings up the question, should we be doing this? I mean, maybe it is a good idea to let people know how we are collecting the data and sharing the data.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful info. And at some point, we're going to need legal weighing in on these things, right? So if we can benefit from your inquiry there, that would be fabulous. And I'm sorry, Jen, so I'm not as familiar with this. This is Section 370. What is this a part of?
This is in the 2018 FAA Reauthorization Act.
Okay. So this is an FAA requirement then?
Yes, that's within there.
This is Paul. I got a quick question, I guess, as from the corrections point of view. Is I'm not sure there's the data we're going to collect, we want shared, especially if it's dealing with mapping of the facility itself. It would be law enforcement sensitive, and I'd be worried about that. So, I think that needs to be thought into, is that there are agencies that may opt out to sharing the data because of security risks.
Yeah, I think absolutely, Paul. So one of my thoughts was it, and along those lines, it feeds into when does the data become a record that needs to be retained in the state of Montana? Because it would just chew up an enormous amount of storage space if every photo image taken that is used to build a mosaic, for example, has to be retained as part of the record. And I think personally, I think that's getting a little bit over the top on it. That maybe what an agency has to do is they may produce a product. Let's say they take and build a mosaic or a 3D elevation model. When they complete that and that becomes a final product for use, if appropriate, then that would become what the record is, or that becomes what is shared publicly. In the case of Department of Justice or other similar type of collections, and even general imagery collections, do agencies need some kind of process by which to quote unquote scrub the data to make sure that there isn't any PII information in it? So for natural resources, we're mostly taking aerial photos of trees and grass. I don't have a ton to worry about. But let's say transportation or justice. Let's say you have a camera on the highway and you could actually identify someone's license plate at a particular point in time. Do we need to blur that out like they do on Amazon or Google before that gets published, or does it not get published because of the sensitivity of the nature? In which case there's an exemption on that data to be shared because of PII or other type of security things, and some kind of guidelines for folks to categorize their data or to determine that it is in the public's best interest for the information not to be shared, right? Okay, so to help us make progress on our objectives here, this discussion for the data sharing is definitely pertinent and going to be useful. My thought on how to progress on here based on the original timeframes of this is that we're supposed to give some kind of procurement guidance and a cost benefit analysis guidance at an earlier time, and then the plan to follow it. So getting back to the procurement process, as far as state government agencies and such, it seems like they're still under the State Procurement Bureau guidelines for those things. And the two things I think that the council should be given a recommendation on is who needs to be approving the purchase or the procurement process or guiding that procurement process. And for example, of a cost benefit analysis that was requested by the legislative auditors and the governor's office as part of the executive order. One, what does that look like? And two, who gets that? Who reviews that or approves it? Is it an agency director that approves it? Is it a central state procurement that approves that? And one of the questions that we're going to have to tackle at some point that they're asking is, should there be some type of central oversight over the procurement and operations of UAVs in the state of Montana? And who is the one that operates that? Is that something that's done as part of the university system, or is that something that is headed up by a state agency? One of the things they're probably not going to do is create a new office or organization to do it, because there aren't funds and resources to do that. So where would that fall under? It was recommended for this council that it be attached to the Department of Transportation, because aviation is a mode of transportation and they have aviation aircraft, and so it made sense to attach it there for the time being while we tackle that question as well. And so I want folks thinking about that as well.
I think that reflects the way the feds are doing it right now for forestry, is they're having their Office of Aviation Services handle carting and procurement of new unmanned aircraft, just like they're handling all their manned aircraft as well. So it seems like that would be in alignment with the federal model from my standpoint.
So the feds are having forestry handle the aircraft procurement pieces?
Well, since I guess when I'm saying feds, I'm talking about Forest Service and DOI specifically. But since they already have an Office of Aviation Services built into that, and they're the guys that cart all their existing manned aircraft as well. They're just putting it into that umbrella to make it fit the manned model.
Craig, I've got a question. It seems to me that don't the state departments have some requirement for certain types of procurements that they have to show a cost benefit? I mean, there's got to be equipment that's being purchased now that they have to convince the people on top that they need it, and this is a benefit to the department, and that there must be a flow chart they follow to do that. They wouldn't do it on everything, but you know, I mean, at the county level here, I mean, there were times when somebody would want us to spend $100,000 on something, but we'd make them show us that what the cost benefit was of it. I mean, there wasn't a formula that was all built in that they had to fill in all the blanks, but they had to show that this is a good use of government money. And so I'm just thinking that maybe not everybody's doing it the same way, but it seems like that must be done out there. I don't know.
I would like to say yes, because that would make good sense and sound good. I'm not myself aware of having run into that on any other procurements. Mike or Gordy or somebody else for the state, have you in some other areas encountered a cost benefit analysis like that, other than generally for like a House Bill 10 project or something?
You know, for my world, which is IT, and there's a pretty comprehensive and rigorous process there is, but this stuff, I guess, is a little bit kind of in between IT and our design construction functions. And I think a lot of it is considered experimental or pilot in some divisions where they're just dabbling to see the benefit, and it's hard to realize it till they can evaluate it. I think the others, it's being done in other states. We're following the lead, and they're seeing the direct benefit. So there's not a lot of analysis going on. But I think that's important that we don't go overboard, and there is some rigor to the process. That's important for any investment we make, and we just haven't got that far down the road yet here.
Craig, this is Dan with Livestock. One thing we have to do is go through our board. Most of the time, if it's purchases over 5,000, but if it's a change in, well, like if we had to purchase another drone, that would probably go in front of our board for approval as well before it even goes to a procurement process as well. So,
well, for me, the logical thing would be to just analyze how are you going to do it without the drone and how are you going to do it with the drone. Okay, classic examples, DOJ. They're going to go out and investigate an accident. And what I read in the report was it's going to be, it chops two hours off of the accident analyzation and recording what took place, and so the highway can get running again. So you say, so the cost benefit in that case is, okay, without the drone, this is what it costs of, you know, the public interruption and the manpower of the department. And with the drone, this is what we could do the same process for. And then you just show that as different conceptual uses of a drone. If it's going to be mapping gravel pits or something like that, then you say, well, this is how it's, if we hire out an airplane to fly it and produce some aerials, and if we go out and with the hand equipment and do it, this is what it's going to take. The drone is going to do it this way. And the beauty is a lot of the manufacturers that are providing this equipment for particular reasons and particular purposes, that's how they sell it. They produce, they show you the advantage of doing it with their equipment. And one company could do it a lot faster than maybe another company even. But it just seems like the cost benefit, it's a way to show that there is a benefit, and it's easy because you can say, well, if we do it manually, this is how much it's going to cost and how much time it's going to take. And if we do it with this equipment, this is the same job, this is what it's going to take. But it's a moving target because I think every department's got different uses. DOJ and DNRC are completely different.
I don't know if it helps at all, but I've got a whole bunch of federal RFIs and RFPs that we've, responded to. We've been awarded some of them. I'm not sure how the state does that process, but perhaps just you know, like somebody said earlier, a lot of this stuff is kind of the first time through. So it's going to be a unique situation, I think, every time for the first couple of iterations, but you know, perhaps just kind of using the same federal model that they've used to start their UAS programs of issuing an RFI, letting, you know, certain people respond, and then, you know, selecting the best, most cost-effective resource that, like Craig was saying, that meets the requirements. I've got a lot of that on hand.
Do we know in general how much money is really being spent on drones at this point? Like, I can tell you from the university side, it's definitely under $5,000, and more often it's under $3,000. So then, considering some of this and how much time we spend going through the process of procuring the aircraft, would seem that we want to minimize to some extent how much paperwork is involved to do so.
Yeah, I think absolutely, Jen. And you know, Wes and Steve, if you guys from the county or from the feds have some kind of example or template that they've used to help develop this, then that would probably be really helpful to help us pull it together. I think state agencies do this, but it's more of a programmatic business operation when they do a cost justification to get approval to move forward with a particular project, like the DOJ example given. So that, you know, they ran through and said, here's how many man hours it takes to do this. And that, I mean, it doesn't take a whole lot of brain power to figure out that there's a lot of potential cost benefits to UAV use and also risk mitigations. If we had and I think for Jen's point, to keep it simple especially for these lower cost units, it's pretty, you know, quick to say, boy, it's a whole lot cheaper to buy a $1,500 drone or a $3,000 drone than to you know, send survey crews out there for 2 days to go collect this on the ground, or to fly a plane and to collect this information pretty quickly. You're like, you know, done. But if it was a form template to make it easy to fill out for folks of, here's a cost of here, alternative methods, here's a cost of method A, method B, the risk involved and the risk mitigated, that would probably streamline that process quite a bit. That they would become so. It may be what it becomes is the recommendation is, so right now there was a cost benefit analysis in the governor's executive order for anything over $1,000. And that was because initially it was going to be, I think, $50. And I talked them up to at least 1,000 because I was like, look, a battery is going to cost more than this. You know, let's not overkill this. It maybe the recommendation is $1,000 is too low. It really should be anything over, you know, 5,000. It requires a cost benefit analysis. So if you're going to buy a $10 or $15, $20,000 drone, now we want to see actual numbers on that for state use. And maybe that's part of our recommendation there. But I don't know if you guys have templates or anything that you could get a hold of that would help us out to at least start putting something together.
Is the scope of this procurement just equipment, or would it also be if I want to purchase the services for someone to do it all for me?
Good question. I think initially it was a purchase of equipment because services would fall under a different category in a sense. It probably would be a question of benefit analysis if you're buying the gear. That have you looked at the cost of hiring someone to run the operation instead, and in which case it'd be no, we're going to use this multiple times. It makes more sense to be procuring it rather than hiring the service. But maybe that's something that gets folded in there.
Yeah, my cost benefit or my even ability to do it internally would be staff availability and somebody trained to do it. I don't have enough staff to do pretty much what I need to do today. So my interest has been more in hopefully hiring someone to do it for me. But I, you know, either way, I'd have to go with whatever we end up with.
If it helps at all, I already uploaded to the Teams. I put in one file there that is our actual federal contract with the DOI as a call when needed service. So if you're interested in that, take a look. And then I also put in the aircraft and pilot cards as examples because you know, that might be another discussion later. But that's how the feds track that the aircraft meets the requirements of their request. And there's an annual inspection and a little certificate that we get for each plane that gets renewed every year. I put those in Teams if you guys are interested in checking those out.
I see him there, Wes. Sounds good. Thanks. All right. So for the sake of the council moving forward, it's and the needs to do this, it's really not going to be as expedient for us all to spend a conversation hashing all these things out. What I really would like to propose is that we have some folks that would offer to take lead on certain areas of these things, and maybe have team members join in to hash out some of the details of the recommendation, and then bring it back to the council and say, here's what we came up with. Here's what we think would make sense to follow. And then together as a team, we can refine that based on any other thoughts we had, and then that becomes the general recommendation that we're going to put forward in our plan. Does that sound like something that would be a good way of proceeding here on this stuff? Does anybody
That
have
makes
any?
sense to me, Craig.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
So does anybody have a passion and good knowledge of cost justification benefit analysis that would help us put together that piece of the recommendation for as our objective under the council that wants to take lead on that? Nobody's jumping up. What about the next things for so that the next category is going to plan, and I think I'm still sharing the objectives things here. Establishing a centralized oversight for these 6 items. Does anybody feel that's their strong suit and they want to start developing that area?
That's an area that I'm really comfortable in, although as a, not a state guy, I would definitely want to have somebody to hold my hand, but the compliance training pieces are definitely right up my alley, so I can help with that.
Okay.
I'd jump in and say that's of interest.
Yeah, myself also.
Okay, so Wes, Jen, and Steve at least. Anybody else want to jump in on that one?
And Craig, I can start putting together a cost benefit analysis thing.
Is that Gordy talking?
Yeah, I'm sure I can pull some general together to get the thing started.
Okay.
I'll help Gordy. This is Mike, Craig.
Okay.
I can help on that as well. James.
I'll do some digging in Gallatin County and see if they might have something that could give us some ideas. So I'll just do some digging.
Okay, and I'll just put a folder out there for cost benefit and any samples you can just throw in there.
Right.
Sounds perfect. That'd be great, and I appreciate that, Steve. Where I'd like to think that the state has some of that organized, Steve, in reality, it comes probably down to agency and department.
Right.
And so some departments that have something really good in place and others have no clue
Right.
on that, and they just do it ad hoc as needed, which may not be that often for them. So sometimes this is where, and I think Jen kind of highlighted it with one of her comments, this is where the legislature gets a little frustrated because do we actually know at the state how much we spend on these units? I could probably find out pretty quick what DNRC spends, but as an enterprise as a whole, no, I really don't know how many are having, and I think James said earlier the DEQ bought 4 this year, well, who knows that except DEQ? So how do we keep track on that? And I think that's part of what they want a recommendation for that central oversight is how many do we have to make sure that we're not over procuring this, that one agency has 10 that are only getting used 30% of the time, and another agency has 2 that are getting used over 100% of the time, type of thing. How do we balance that out appropriately? All right, and then the citizen interaction piece. This is more of a policy piece, and this is that's an area that that I became interested in in this whole discussion a year ago, was how do we operate this as a government entity, how do we have the framework to both provide the benefit to citizens and also the protection for citizens, so that we aren't the big brother government spying on citizens, but we are providing a service to citizens? And how does government keep itself in check, or who has oversight on that? And it may be that part of our recommendation is that there should be some public citizens that sit on that oversight committee or that group that does that, so they have eyes on how government operates with this stuff. Something to think about going forward too. I'm not doing that alone, but I'll certainly can help weigh in on that area.
Hey, Craig, this is Dan. I'd like to be on that as well.
And also,
certainly,
that was one of the things that started the little fire going at the legislature for some of their bills but it wasn't state agencies flying over private property. It was just they were trying to control FAA airspace, and that's undoable. But I think it's a good idea to have this, and I might have an arm's length look at what's going on with that and provide some comments too. So.
yeah, and I think that'd be useful. And this is where, and I also, I really appreciate Steve and Wes being on this council from an outside of government perspective, and really want to make sure that we're able to leverage your perspective on that, because you represent the public sector, the citizens, the businesses of the state. What potentially could end up becoming is what the state uses as a framework may become guidelines for all of Montana operations, right? So last year there was a lot of concerns down Nebraska because somebody was flying these things and doing grid patterns over Nebraska and areas of Colorado, and they had, I think, 3 sheriff's departments together trying to figure out who's doing this and what are they doing with the information. There was a lot of citizen concern, but nobody knew who was operating that, and so that puts private business at risk, right? So.
I think Steve brought up a good point too with running into where we'd be at odds with FAA regulations. And I'm wondering if it wouldn't be worth some time just talking with Luke Waters, that's in the FSDO for the FAA that oversees UAS regulation for the state of Montana.
I think that'd be an excellent path. Can you say it again? Who's that? Luke Waters?
Yes, Luke Waters, Watters.
And who's he with again?
He's with the FSDO in Helena, so the Flight District Standards Office.
Yeah, that'd be very helpful. And I think in large part for a general framework for state government, it's going to fall back on, you have to follow FAA guidelines on this stuff. Certainly we can't step on that. Does the state want to add anything to it will become the question. And so understanding that baseline of what every agency has to follow, at the very least, what part do they operate under, or COA or whatever is their, frameworks is going to be what the FAA determines, and then avenues for that. And Jen, you got a lot of experience in that area, I know, and maybe having Luke weigh in would help too. So, all right, so if folks could start thinking about how to proceed in those relevant areas, that would be appreciated. And let's talk more about how to proceed on that next time. If you're able to start gathering some ideas or framework to put forth, quite happy to do screen shares with other people. If you've pulled out a proposal and here's how we proceed in our area and how we think we should start fleshing this out, that'd be fabulous. As far as procurement, at some point, if needed, we can roll in the state procurement office. And as far as legal goes for some of these other areas, both in citizen interaction, maybe procurement or something if needed, we'll lean on legal folks as well. We just have to determine the right time to bring these people in. So for example, like Luke, when is a good time to actually bring him in that would be relevant for us to help us develop our area and to talk with us about that? We can certainly have him come on one of these meetings or in a separate, get together if that's more relevant or useful.
Hey, Craig, could I ask a quick question on the procurement? There's that state procurement manual. I think I went through the whole thing, and I'm trying to understand, are we talking about a separate, ultimately maybe a separate document to that, which would be only aimed at UAS, or is there a UAS section inside that, or are you trying to create some language to dovetail into the existing document? Because if the state has this procurement manual, they probably have an expectation that we can't veer from that everything's under it, but all of a sudden now we come up with something different. So I'm not quite understanding how this fits in.
You know, that's a good question. And I think from what I'm gathering from people, when they're buying an aircraft, they're following just general state procurement laws. There's no special rules for buying an aircraft. It still follows the general state procurement process. So I think from my perspective, from us as a council, the general purchasing of a UAV would follow that similar deal, because if it falls under FAA guidelines as an aircraft, then it should follow under state procurement process as an aircraft. What piece of it should or need to fall under an IT review, and if what my agency member discussed and what I think Dan or Mike had commented on, if we really are focused on the data and the data security, data sharing, data transmission, and how to protect that, maybe the guidance is that doesn't necessarily need additional IT procurement review. It needs IT security review. And so we can give guidance on how to do that, because at the state, part of the discussion that hasn't been resolved does the central IT, SITSD, have to approve the use of a drone? And is that necessary? Is that helpful? Or what is the role that they're really trying to accomplish? And I think it comes down to, they're just trying to make sure they protect the state network and state data. And they may not actually care what device you're purchasing. They just want to know, how are you going to protect it, and are mitigating any risks there. And so maybe that becomes our guidance. Does it become part of the state procurement document? I suppose if it became evident that there need to be something added to that, then we might recommend that. Otherwise, if the state procurement document actually already covers what we're doing, then that can be the recommendation also, that the state procurement guidelines already apply to these devices in this general way. The only recommendation might be an additional review for IT security of the data or something like that.
Thanks.
Or a recommendation that it only needs IT approval if the device is intended to be put on the network itself.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think most state agencies are not doing. They can get the data off that device without actually having to hook that device up to the state network.
Yeah.
The state procurement folks also maintain some template contracts, and I could see if there's some language that our committee feels that this should be in a drone contract, we could offer that up as a part of their template as an option. That could be another potential part we can provide input into.
Yeah, good point, Gordy. All right, so for the next meeting, let's come back to the notes here, what people are going to work on. Working off the laptop, I have to keep jumping back and forth between screens. So for state procurement, Gordy, Mike, and James, if you guys will get together and chat a little bit about how to proceed with doing that, and any type of cost benefit analysis recommendation. And Wes, Jen, and Steve, if you guys could talk a little bit about establishing that oversight and control, a plan of how to develop that stuff. And we could talk about that at the next meeting. I think that would be helpful. Is that something that can happen in the next week, or do folks need actually 2 weeks to be able to pull that together?
Give it a shot.
Okay.
Shoot for a week.
All right, and if for some reason we can't make it by next week, let me know by Tuesday. Then we may adjust the meetings. We'll try to keep this cadence going for a bit, just because if we let our traction get slowed down, I'm afraid that we're not going to be close to hitting anything that is helpful for recommending here in the time frame given, which I understand is tight for everyone. And but I appreciate the effort folks make into this. And hopefully, as we can borrow and leverage from other organizations like FAA and such, it'll help us shorten that curve, that we don't have a ton we have to overly develop, just tweak from Montana. So. All right, so let's see on the rest of the agenda, cover a few things. Any other items that the council wants to discuss today or to put on the agenda for next time?
Hey, Craig, just real quick, could we in the teams perhaps make, I guess, a file folder for each one of those working groups?
Yeah, and what the teams actually can do is we can create a channel
Okay.
for those working groups, and I can set those up for folks and have the members in the channel, so you actually have your own little workspace within the team to work in.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, good idea. All right, I don't know if anyone jumped in that I didn't notice. Do we have anybody on for the public and any public comment? Or public comment by a group member that doesn't want to be recorded for the council? Okay, hearing none. So if that's it for folks, we'll adjourn for today and get back next week and see how we're doing.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay, thanks everybody.